The smell of burnt coffee hit my nose before I even saw the black Tahoe parked sideways across my driveway. Two women in matching business suits were wrapping orange tape around my cabin like they were gift wrapping a bomb. The taller one had her phone pressed to her ear, pacing back and forth on my gravel like she owned the place. "Yes, we filed the federal complaint this morning," she barked into the phone. "Ecological damage, canyon preservation zone. He built right through a protected habitat." I cut the engine on my pickup and sat there for a second, watching them through my windshield. The shorter one was taking pictures of everything: my deck, my windows, even my damn mailbox. Click, click, click. Like she was documenting a crime scene. If you're watching Conflict Story, you know how these things start. What looks like a simple property dispute. It's never just that. There's always something deeper lurking underneath. I grabbed my fishing gear from the truck bed and walked toward my front door. That's when the tall one spotted me. She had that look, you know the one, the same expression a hawk gets when it sees a field mouse. "Mr. Thornton?" She strode over like she was about to serve me divorce papers. "I'm Lisa Vernon, and this is my sister Carol. We represent the Canyon Guardians Environmental Group." I'd lived here 15 years, never heard of any Canyon Guardians. "Ladies," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you mind telling me why you're decorating my property?" Lisa Vernon smiled, but it was the kind of smile that makes you check your wallet afterward. "We're here about your illegal construction project. You've built a structure in a federally protected ecosystem without proper permits." "Federally protected?" I almost laughed. "This is my land. I've got the lease agreement right inside." "Not anymore," Carol chimed in, still snapping pictures. "We've initiated legal action. 78,000 in damages for ecosystem disruption. That little addition of yours, it needs to come down." The orange tape fluttered in the morning breeze. It reminded me of the warning flags they put up before controlled explosions. I reached into my fishing vest and felt the worn edges of my father's old ranger badge, something I'd carried for luck since he passed. He'd been the real guardian of this canyon, back when that meant something. "You filed what now?" I kept my voice level, but my hand tightened around that badge. Lisa pulled out a thick folder. "Federal Environmental Impact Lawsuit. We have documentation of rare bird nesting sites that your construction has destroyed. Red-tailed hawks, specifically. Protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I'd been fishing this canyon since I was 12 years old. The only red-tailed hawks I'd ever seen were the ones painted on tourist t-shirts down in town." "Let me get this straight," I said. "You two show up on my property, wrap it in tape, and tell me I owe you 78 grand? "Not us," Carol said, lowering her camera. "The federal government. We're just the concerned citizens who brought the violation to their attention." Something felt wrong about this whole setup. These women had the practice movements of people who'd done this before. The way Lisa held that folder, the way Carol positioned herself to photograph me along with my cabin, the matching outfits. Even their damn haircuts looked coordinated. "You have papers for me to look at?" I asked. Lisa handed me a document that looked official enough. Lots of legal language I didn't understand. But one thing jumped out at me: the date on the environmental survey, 3 weeks ago. I'd started my addition 4 months back. "This survey is dated after I started building," I pointed out. "Irrelevant," Lisa said. "The habitat existed before your construction. The damage is done." That's when Sheriff Hancock's cruiser pulled into my driveway. The sisters had called ahead. This whole thing was choreographed. Tom Hancock climbed out of his car looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. We'd known each other since high school, and I could read his face. This wasn't his idea. "Mike," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I've got to serve you with a construction moratorium. No work until this gets sorted out." He handed me another set of papers, more legal language, more official seals. "Tom, you know this is bullshit, right?" He glanced at the sisters, then back at me. "I just do what the paperwork says, Mike. Sorry." Lisa Vernon was still smiling. "Mr. Thornton, we don't enjoy taking these measures, but the canyon's ecosystem is fragile. One irresponsible property owner can damage habitat that took centuries to develop." I looked at my cabin. My father had taught me to respect this land, to take only what I needed and leave the rest for the next generation. I'd been more careful with this addition than most people are with their houseplants. "What happens now?" I asked. "You can fight it in court," Carol said. Of course, legal fees in federal environmental cases tend to run pretty high. Most people find it cheaper to just comply. The way she said it, like she'd given this speech before, like she'd practiced it. Sheriff Hancock was already walking back to his car. "Mike, you need anything, you know where to find me." After he drove off, the sisters started packing up their equipment. Lisa turned back to me one more time. "Think about it, Mr. Thornton. $78,000, or a legal battle that could drag on for years and cost you twice that." They climbed into their Tahoe and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with orange tape fluttering around my home like prayer flags at a funeral. I went inside and poured myself a whiskey. Through my kitchen window, I watched the sun set behind the canyon walls. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but something fundamental had shifted. Those women weren't environmentalists. They were something else entirely, and that something else had just declared war on everything my father had taught me about protecting this place. The morning light filtering through my kitchen window felt different somehow. Colder. I was nursing my second cup of coffee when I heard gravel crunching outside, someone walking slow and deliberate toward my front door. Harvey Stone stood on my porch, his weathered face creased with concern. At 71, Harvey had been my neighbor longer than anyone, and he didn't make social calls before 8 in the morning, unless something was seriously wrong. "Mike," he said, accepting the coffee I offered him. "We need to talk." Harvey settled into the chair across from my kitchen table and stared out at the canyon for a long moment. The orange tape was still there, wrapped around my deck railing like some kind of warning ribbon. "Those women who visited you yesterday," he said finally. "They've been busy." "What do you mean busy?" "They hit up half the neighborhood after they left here, going door to door, showing pictures, asking questions about your construction project." Harvey sipped his coffee. "But here's the thing, Mike. They weren't asking if anyone had problems with what you were building." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. What were they asking? They wanted to know how long people had lived here, who owned what land, what kind of money folks might have for legal fees. Harvey's eyes met mine, and they were real interested in who might be looking to sell their property. I set down my cup harder than I meant to. "They're shopping for land?" That's what it sounded like to me. "And Mike, there's something else. I did some checking last night, that Canyon Guardians group they claim to represent. I can't find any record of it anywhere. No website, no registration with the state, nothing." The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't like. "So who are they?" "That's what we need to figure out." Harvey pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But I'll tell you what I did find. Property records. Those sisters bought the Hendricks place about 6 months ago. Then the old Morrison cabin 2 months after that. Both times they paid cash, well over asking price." I studied the paper. "That's a lot of money for someone who doesn't exist officially." "Gets better," Harvey said. "I called my nephew Danny. He works at the county recorder's office. He says there's been a lot of unusual activity lately. Companies he's never heard of buying up properties around the canyon. All cash deals. All way above market value." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You think they're trying to buy out the whole area?" "I think they're trying to clear out the whole area," Harvey said. "And when folks won't sell willingly, they find other ways to persuade them." That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Thornton?" The voice was young, female, and nervous. "This is Emma Wright. I'm a geologist with the Forest Service." "What can I do for you, Miss Wright?" "I need to talk to you about the environmental survey filed on your property. Can we meet somewhere private?" Harvey raised his eyebrows. I motioned for him to stay. "Can you come to my place?" I asked. "No, sir. I don't think that's safe. There's a coffee shop in town called Dora's Place. Can you meet me there in an hour?" After I hung up, Harvey leaned forward. "Forest Service?" "Yeah," and she sounded scared. We drove into town together, Harvey's old Ford pickup rumbling along the canyon road. The morning was beautiful, the kind of clear, crisp day that reminded you why people fought to live in places like this. But something dark was creeping across the landscape, and I was starting to understand it had nothing to do with environmental protection. Dora's Place sat on Main Street like it had for 30 years, all worn wood and faded vinyl booths. But when Harvey and I walked in, the atmosphere felt different, colder. The usual morning crowd was there, but conversation stopped when they saw me. Eyes followed us to our booth in the back corner. Dora herself came over with the coffee pot, but she didn't meet my eyes the way she usually did. "Morning, Mike," she said, filling our cups. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday." And news travels fast. It does when federal investigators are involved. She glanced around the diner. "People are talking, about what you might have done up there." I could feel the weight of those conversations pressing down on the room like storm clouds. "What are they saying, Dora?" "That you built right through some kind of bird sanctuary, that you might have destroyed something important." She finally looked at me directly. "That true, Mike?" Before I could answer, a young woman with short brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses slid into the booth across from us. Emma Wright looked like she was maybe 25, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from carrying secrets you're not supposed to know. "Mr. Thornton, thank you for meeting me." She glanced around the diner, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I need to tell you something about that environmental survey, the one those women filed." "I'm listening." "The species they claim you've disturbed, red-tailed hawks nesting in that specific location. According to our records, there haven't been confirmed red-tailed hawk nests in your area for over 20 years. Emma's hands shook slightly as she opened a manila folder. "But that's not the worst part." Harvey leaned in closer. "What's the worst part?" "The soil samples they submitted as evidence, they don't match the geology of your property at all. They're from somewhere completely different, somewhere about 200 miles south of here." Emma pushed a lab report across the table. "Someone faked this entire environmental assessment." The diner suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I could feel eyes watching us from every corner of the room, and I wondered how many of those eyes might be reporting back to the Vernon sisters. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Emma's voice dropped even lower. "Because I think you're in serious danger. And I think what happened to you is going to happen to other people around here if someone doesn't stop it." She stood up quickly, leaving the folder on the table. "Be careful, Mr. Thornton. These people aren't who they claim to be, and they're not finished with you yet." As she walked away, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The Vernon sisters' black Tahoe was parked right outside the diner window, and Lease Vernon was sitting inside it, watching us through dark sunglasses. The black Tahoe followed us halfway back to the canyon before it disappeared down a side road. Harvey kept checking his mirrors, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They wanted us to see them watching," he said. Back at my place, I spread Emma's documents across my kitchen table. The lab reports were damning. Soil samples that didn't match my property, environmental assessments for species that hadn't lived here in decades. But what caught my attention was a small detail at the bottom of one page. A surveyor's signature I recognized. "Jake Collins," I read aloud. "I know that name." Harvey squinted at the signature. "Yeah, from where?" That's when it hit me. "He's not a surveyor. He's an actor. Does community theater down in Riverside. I saw him in a play last summer. He played some kind of government inspector." Jesus, Mike, they hired an actor to fake an environmental survey? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll lose more than your cabin. This is your only warning." Harvey saw my face. "What is it?" I showed him the message. "Looks like we're getting close to something they don't want us to find." That afternoon, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of fighting their fake environmental claims, I drove down to the county courthouse to pull the original records on my property. If these women were running some kind of scam, there had to be a paper trail somewhere. The courthouse was busy, but I found what I was looking for in the basement records office. An older clerk named Margaret helped me navigate the filing system, and what we found changed everything. "Well, that's interesting," Margaret said, squinting at a document from 1991. "According to this, your property isn't privately owned at all. It's a federal land lease." My heart started pounding. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not just a property owner, Mr. Thornton. You're a federal lessee. That gives you certain rights that private property owners don't have." She pulled out another file, including protection against fraudulent environmental claims. I stared at the lease agreement. My father's signature was right there at the bottom, dated 34 years ago. He'd never told me the land was federal. All those years, I'd thought I owned it outright. "There's more," Margaret said. "According to the federal database, your lease is in good standing, current through 2031. No violations, no complaints, no environmental restrictions." So those women have no legal standing to make claims against me? Not only that, Margaret said, but filing false environmental reports against federal lessees is a federal crime. If you can prove they faked those documents... I drove home with copies of everything, my mind racing. The Vernon sisters weren't just running a real estate scam. They were committing federal crimes. But before I could figure out my next move, I found Sheriff Hancock waiting in my driveway. He looked even more uncomfortable than he had yesterday. "Mike, I've got more bad news. That federal environmental inspector is coming tomorrow morning. Name of Bob Craig. He's going to assess the damage and potentially expand the moratorium." Federal inspector? The name Jake Collins suddenly made sense. "Tom, I need to show you something." I handed him the lease documents. "This property is federal land. I'm a federal lessee in good standing. Those environmental claims, they're fraudulent." Tom studied the papers, his expression growing darker. "Mike, if this is true, then I've been serving illegal orders." "It's true, and there's more. That surveyor who signed off on their environmental report, he's not a surveyor. He's a community theater actor." "Aw, hell." Tom rubbed his forehead. "Mike, I think you better call the FBI." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma's warning, about the Vernon sisters' systematic approach to buying up canyon properties, about the fear I'd seen in the faces at Dora's diner. These women weren't just after my land, they were after the entire canyon. Around midnight, I heard a car engine idling outside. I looked through my bedroom window and saw the black Tahoe parked at the end of my driveway, headlights off, just sitting there, watching. I grabbed my father's old service flashlight and stepped onto my deck. The Tahoe's engine revved once, then the vehicle slowly drove away. But in that brief moment when the headlights swept across my property, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Someone had been walking around my cabin, fresh footprints in the soft earth by my foundation, cigarette butts scattered near my propane tank. They hadn't just been watching, they'd been preparing something. I checked every lock, every window, every possible entry point. Then I sat in my kitchen with the phone in one hand and my father's service revolver in the other, waiting for dawn. The federal lease gave me legal protection. The fake documents gave me evidence of fraud. But looking out at those orange warning tapes fluttering in the darkness, I realized this wasn't about law or evidence anymore. The Vernon sisters had escalated this into something much more dangerous. And tomorrow, when their fake federal inspector showed up, I'd find out just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The fake federal inspector arrived at 7:30 sharp, driving a white government-looking sedan with temporary plates. Bob Craig stepped out wearing a crisp uniform and carrying an official-looking clipboard, but something about him felt wrong from the start. Maybe it was the way his boots were too clean for someone who supposedly spent time in the field, or how he kept glancing back at the black Tahoe parked across the road, where the Vernon sisters sat, watching like directors overseeing a performance. "Mr. Thornton," Craig approached with the kind of forced confidence I'd seen in bad salesmen. "I'm here to conduct the federal environmental assessment." I was ready for him. "Before you start, I'd like to see your credentials." He handed me an ID badge that looked legitimate enough, but I'd done my homework. Real federal inspectors carry specific documentation, and they don't show up without advance notice through official channels. "I'll need to examine the construction site and document any habitat disruption," Craig said, pulling out a camera. That's when I played my first card. "Actually, before you do that, I should mention this property is under federal lease agreement. I'm not sure you have jurisdiction here." Craig's confident expression flickered for just a second. "All federal land is subject to environmental protection, regardless of lease status." "True," I said. "But fraudulent environmental reports filed against federal lessees, that's a different kind of federal crime entirely." The color drained from Craig's face. Behind him, I could see Lisa Vernon getting out of the Tahoe, her phone pressed to her ear. She was making calls, probably trying to figure out how I'd learned about the lease status. "I don't know what you're implying," Craig said, but his voice had lost its authority. "I'm implying that Jake Collins isn't a qualified environmental surveyor. I'm implying that soil samples from 200 miles away don't constitute valid evidence. And I'm implying that you're about to become an accessory to federal fraud." Craig's hands were shaking now. He looked back at the Vernon sisters like a drowning man looking for a life preserver. But Lisa was already walking away, leaving him standing there with his fake clipboard and his temporary plates. "Look," Craig said, lowering his voice. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but these people don't mess around." "What people?" "The Vernons. This isn't their first rodeo. They've done this in Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. They find areas with development potential, scare out the locals with fake environmental claims, then flip the land to developers for 10 times what they paid." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "How many times have you helped them?" "This is my first job with them. They hired me 3 weeks ago, said it was just a simple property evaluation." Craig was sweating now, despite the cool morning air. "They didn't tell me about the fake documents until yesterday. By then, I was already in too deep." "Not too deep to get out," I said. "Not if you're willing to help me stop them." Craig looked around nervously. "You don't understand. These women have connections, real ones. They've got people in state government, federal agencies, law enforcement. Cross them, and you don't just lose your property. You disappear from the system entirely." Before I could respond, Sheriff Hancock's cruiser pulled into my driveway. But Tom wasn't alone. A woman in a dark suit got out of the passenger side, and everything about her screamed federal agent. "Mr. Thornton," the woman approached with credentials already in hand. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. We need to talk about the fraudulent environmental claims filed against your property." Craig went white as a sheet. "I need to go," he muttered, backing toward his car. "Actually, Mr. Collins," Agent Chen said without looking at him, "you need to stay right where you are." The next hour was a blur of questions, documents, and phone calls. Agent Chen had been tracking the Vernon sisters for months, following a trail of fraudulent environmental claims across 4 states. My case was just the latest in a pattern of sophisticated real estate fraud. "The problem is," Chen explained, "they're very good at covering their tracks. By the time we can prove fraud, they've already moved on to the next location. We need someone on the inside to help us build a case." Craig was sitting on my porch steps, head in his hands. "They'll kill me if they find out I'm talking to you." "They'll kill your career if you don't," Chen said. "Federal fraud carries serious prison time, but cooperation, that's how you avoid becoming their next victim." That's when my phone rang. Lisa Vernon's name appeared on the caller ID. "Answer it," Chen said. "Act normal." I put the phone on speaker. Lisa's voice was smooth as silk, but I could hear the steel underneath. "Mr. Thornton, I understand there's been some confusion about your property status. Perhaps we should meet and discuss a resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "The kind where everyone walks away happy. We drop the environmental claims, you drop whatever investigation you think you're conducting, and we all move on with our lives." Agent Chen was scribbling notes furiously, signaling me to keep Lisa talking. "And if I don't want to move on?" Lisa's laugh was like broken glass. "Then you'll discover that environmental fraud is the least of your problems. There are other ways to remove obstacles, Mr. Thornton. Ways that don't require paperwork." The line went dead. Agent Chen looked at me grimly. "That," she said, "was a direct threat, which means they're getting desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices." As if to prove her point, my phone buzzed with another text message. This one contained a single photo, my cabin, taken from inside the property line. Sometime during our conversation with Agent Chen, someone had been walking around my land again. But this time, they'd left something behind, a small device attached to my propane tank, blinking red in the afternoon shadows. Agent Chen was already on her radio calling for the bomb squad before I could process what I was seeing. The red light on that device blinked like a heartbeat against the metal of my propane tank, steady and ominous in the fading afternoon light. "Everyone back to the road," Chen ordered. "Now!" We retreated to a safe distance while we waited for the specialists. Jake Collins, or Bob Craig, or whatever his real name was, sat in the back of Tom's cruiser, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "This is how they operate," he kept saying. "First the legal pressure, then the threats, then—" He gestured toward my cabin. "They don't just want your property, they want to send a message to everyone else in the canyon." The bomb squad arrived 40 minutes later. What they found wasn't actually an explosive. It was a sophisticated monitoring device designed to look like one. The Vernon sisters wanted me to find it, wanted me scared, Wanted me to know they could reach me anytime they chose. Psychological warfare, Agent Chen explained. Classic intimidation tactic. They're counting on fear to make you fold. But fear wasn't what I was feeling anymore. It was rage. Pure, clean, focused rage. Agent Chen, I said, what would you need to shut them down permanently? Evidence of ongoing fraud, recorded confessions, proof of their systematic targeting of federal lessees. She looked at me carefully. Why? Because I've got an idea. That evening, I called Harvey and asked him to spread word around the canyon that I was giving up, selling out, moving away rather than fighting the federal environmental claims. I wanted the Vernon sisters to hear that Mike Thornton was broken, scared, and ready to negotiate. The call came at 8 o'clock that night. Lisa Vernon sounded positively cheerful. Mr. Thornton, I'm so glad you've come to your senses. Perhaps we can meet tomorrow and discuss terms. Your terms are mine. Oh, I think you'll find our offer quite generous. $50,000 for your property, plus we'll make all the legal troubles disappear. Clean slate. $50,000 for land that was worth at least 3 times that much. But I played along. Where do you want to meet? There's an old mining office up Canyon Road. Abandoned place, very private. 10 in the morning. After I hung up, Agent Chen smiled grimly. They picked the perfect spot for a confession. Remote, no witnesses, probably soundproof. She held up a tiny recording device. Good thing you'll be wearing this. Jake Collins looked up from his coffee cup. You don't understand these women. They're not going to just confess to everything because you ask nicely. No, I said, but they might confess if they think they've already won. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds building over the canyon walls. I drove to the abandoned mining office with Agent Chen's wire taped to my chest and my father's ranger badge in my pocket. The building squatted against the hillside like a concrete tumor, its broken windows staring out at the canyon like dead eyes. The Vernon sisters were already there, along with 2 men I'd never seen before. Big men in expensive suits who looked like they'd be more comfortable in a corporate boardroom than a mining shack. The kind of men who made problems disappear. Mr. Thornton, Lisa Vernon smiled as I walked in. So good of you to come. I trust you brought the property documents? I handed her a folder. Everything's there. Deed, lease agreement, construction permits. Carol Vernon was studying the papers while Lisa talked. Excellent. And you understand the terms? $50,000, all legal claims dropped, and you vacate the property within 30 days? I understand the terms, I said, but I've got a few questions first. One of the suited men stepped closer. This isn't a negotiation. Actually, it is, I said. See, I've been doing some research on Canyon Guardians. Interesting organization, especially the part where it doesn't actually exist. Lisa's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I've discovered that you've been running this same scam across 4 states. Fake environmental groups, fraudulent surveys, intimidation tactics. I pulled out my phone. I've also discovered that threatening federal lessees is a federal crime. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. The 2 men in suits moved to block the exit. You're making a serious mistake, Carol said. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the ones who made the mistake. You picked the wrong property, threatened the wrong person, and committed fraud against the federal government. I looked directly at Lisa. How many other people have you done this to? Lisa's mask finally slipped. More than you can imagine. And we'll keep doing it because people like you are too weak to stop us. Too scared, too isolated, too powerless. Tell me about Colorado, I pressed. How many families did you force out there? Dozens, Carol said proudly. Bought their land for pennies on the dollar, then sold it to developers for millions. It's basic business, Thornton. Supply and demand. And if they won't sell? Lisa shrugged. Then accidents happen. Houses burn down. People get hurt. Amazing how quickly property values drop after a few unfortunate incidents. One of the suited men was getting impatient. Enough talking? Sign the papers or... That's when the doors burst open, and Agent Chen walked in with a full FBI tactical team. Nobody move! Federal agents! The Vernon sisters looked shocked for about 3 seconds. Then Lisa started laughing. You think this changes anything? She said as the agents cuffed her. You think arresting us stops what's coming to this canyon? We're small fish, Thornton. The people we work for own judges, senators, entire government departments. Carol nodded as they led her away. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last long. But as I watched them being loaded into FBI vehicles, I realized something important. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, the canyon felt quiet, peaceful. The storm clouds were breaking up, and sunlight was streaming through the gaps like hope itself. The Vernon sisters were right about one thing, though. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. 3 days after the Vernon sisters were arrested, I thought the worst was behind us. I was wrong. The phone call came at 6 in the morning. Agent Chen's voice was tight with frustration. Mike, we've got a problem. The Vernons made bail yesterday. Their lawyer, some hotshot from Denver, got them released on a technicality. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What kind of technicality? The recording we made at the mining office, their attorney is claiming entrapment, says we coerced you into wearing a wire without proper federal authorization. Chen paused. It's bullshit, but it's enough to get them out while we build a stronger case. Through my bedroom window, I could see the canyon bathed in morning light. Everything looked peaceful, normal, but I knew better now. Where are they? That's the other problem. They disappeared from their hotel last night, left no forwarding address, no contact information. But Mike, their lawyer, left a message for you. My blood ran cold. What kind of message? He said his clients want to make one final offer, a generous settlement that would make all of this go away permanently. I got dressed quickly and drove into town, checking my mirrors the whole way. No black Tahoe, no suspicious vehicles, but that didn't mean anything. The Vernon sisters had proven they could reach me whenever they wanted. Dora's place was busier than usual for a Thursday morning. Word had gotten around about the FBI arrests, and people were talking in hushed tones about what it all meant. When I walked in, conversation stopped. Eyes followed me to the counter. Dora poured my coffee without being asked. Heard you caused quite a stir-up at the canyon. Something like that. People are saying those women weren't really environmentalists, that they were running some kind of scam. I nodded. That's about right. So what happens now? Before I could answer, Harvey slid into the stool next to me. His face was grim. Mike, we need to talk, privately. We took our coffee to a corner booth. Harvey kept glancing around the diner like he expected trouble to walk through the door at any moment. I've been asking around, he said quietly. Talking to folks about property sales, about who's been buying up land around here. What I found out, it's bigger than we thought. He pulled out a manila folder. These are property records going back 2 years. Look at the pattern. The documents showed a systematic campaign of land acquisition throughout the canyon area. Shell companies, cash buyers, properties purchased well above market value. But it wasn't random. There was a clear strategy behind it. They're not just buying properties, Harvey explained. They're buying specific properties, ones that control access to water rights, mineral rights, development corridors. Development for what? That's what I was afraid you'd ask. Harvey showed me another document, a preliminary environmental impact study for something called the Canyon Vista Resort and Casino Complex. 5,000 acres, hotel towers, conference centers, golf courses, the works. I stared at the plans. The proposed resort would encompass the entire canyon, including my property. This is what they were really after. Gets worse. Look at who filed the preliminary application. The name at the bottom of the document made my hands shake. Cascade Development Group. I'd heard that name before, whispered in conversations about political corruption and environmental destruction. They were the company that had turned pristine wilderness areas across the West into concrete and neon playgrounds. Harvey, if Cascade is behind this, then the Vernon sisters were just the opening act. The real players haven't even shown up yet. That afternoon, I got my answer about the Vernons' whereabouts. They were back. The black Tahoe was parked in my driveway when I returned home, but this time they weren't alone. 2 more vehicles flanked it. A silver Mercedes with tinted windows and a white van with no markings. Professional muscle. Lisa Vernon stood on my porch like she owned the place, but she looked different now, harder. The pretense of environmental activism was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Mr. Thornton, she called out as I parked my truck, we need to finish our conversation. I stayed by my vehicle, keys in hand. I thought we finished it when the FBI arrested you. That was just a misunderstanding. We're here to make things right. The man getting out of the Mercedes was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He had the kind of authority that came from never being told no. Mr. Thornton, I'm Richard Cascade. I believe you know my company's reputation. I'd heard the stories. Environmental lawsuits buried under paperwork. Tribal lands seized through legal technicalities. Opposition that simply disappeared. Richard Cascade didn't just buy properties, he eliminated obstacles. What do you want? I want to make you very wealthy, Cascade said, approaching with a briefcase. $2 million for your federal lease. Cash, no questions, no conditions, no legal complications. $2 million was more money than I'd ever dreamed of. Enough to buy a new property anywhere I wanted. Enough to disappear completely if I chose. And if I say no? Cascade smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. Then we'll proceed with Plan B. The Vernon sisters' environmental claims were just the beginning. We have other tools at our disposal. Zoning violations, tax assessments, safety inspections. We can make your life so complicated, so expensive, so dangerous that you'll beg us to take your property off your hands. For a lot less than $2 million, I'm guessing. Considerably less. I looked at my cabin, at the canyon walls rising beyond it, at the land my father had protected for 34 years. Then I looked at my father's ranger badge, still tucked in my pocket. I need time to think about it. Of course, Cascade said. Take all the time you need. We'll be in touch tomorrow morning with the paperwork. After they left, I sat on my porch watching the sun set behind the canyon walls. The orange tape was gone now, but I could still feel its presence, still feel the weight of everything that was coming. Tomorrow, I'd have to make the most important decision of my life. $2 million, or a fight against forces that had never lost before. But sitting there in the gathering darkness, touching my father's badge, I realized the choice had already been made. Some things were worth more than money. Some fights were worth having, even when you couldn't win. The canyon deserved better than concrete and neon. And maybe, just maybe, I could give it what it deserved. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my father's ranger badge, the federal lease documents, and a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. At sunrise, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Agent Chen. The second was to Harvey. The third was to every news outlet in the state. By 8 in the morning, my property was crawling with reporters, FBI agents, environmental activists, and curious locals. I'd turned my private battle into a very public spectacle. When Richard Cascade and his crew arrived at 9 o'clock with their briefcase full of money, they found a crowd of 50 people waiting for them. Cascade stepped out of his Mercedes, looking like a man who'd walked into an ambush, which, in a way, he had. "Mr. Thornton," he called out, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I believe we had a private meeting scheduled." "We did," I replied, standing on my porch with news cameras rolling and FBI agents flanked around me. "But I decided this conversation needed to be public. This is highly irregular. So is trying to steal federal land through environmental fraud." The crowd murmured. Cascade's face darkened, but he maintained his composure. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're simply offering to purchase your lease at fair market value. $2 million for a federal lease that gives me rights to this land through 2031. I held up the lease documents. That's not fair market value. That's desperation money." One of the reporters pushed forward. "Mr. Cascade, is it true that your company has been systematically acquiring canyon properties for a resort development?" No comment. But Lisa Vernon, standing behind Cascade's shoulder, couldn't keep her mouth shut. "Of course we have. This entire canyon is going to be the crown jewel of Western tourism. Hotels, casinos, golf courses, everything this backward area needs to join the 21st century." Cascade whipped around to glare at her, but the damage was done. The reporters had their story, and Agent Chen had her confession. "Miss Vernon," Agent Chen stepped forward with handcuffs ready. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal land fraud." "You can't arrest us," Carol Vernon protested. "We have rights. We have lawyers." "Yes," I said, pulling out my phone and playing a recording. "You also have a habit of making confessions." The recording was from yesterday's confrontation. The Vernon sisters admitting to running their scam across multiple states, threatening property owners, even discussing the accidents that happened to people who wouldn't cooperate. As the FBI agents led the Vernon sisters away in handcuffs, again, Richard Cascade found himself surrounded by reporters and activists. His composed facade was cracking. "Mr. Cascade," a young journalist called out, "how do you respond to allegations that Cascade Development has been using intimidation and fraud to acquire properties for development?" I respond by saying this entire circus is a publicity stunt by a man who's too stubborn to accept progress. Progress? I stepped down from my porch, feeling the weight of my father's badge in my pocket. You call destroying a protected ecosystem progress? I call creating jobs and bringing economic development to a dying region progress, yes. That's when Harvey spoke up from the crowd. "What about the families you forced out in Colorado? Was that progress too?" Cascade's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but it was too late. The crowd was turning hostile. The reporters were asking harder questions, and Agent Chen was taking notes on everything. "This area doesn't need casinos and golf courses," I said, my voice carrying across the crowd. "It needs protection. It needs people who understand that some things are more valuable than money." An environmental activist in the crowd started clapping, then another. Soon the entire gathering was applauding, and Richard Cascade was backing toward his Mercedes with the look of a man who just watched his empire crumble. "This isn't over, Thornton," he said as he reached his car door. "Yes, it is." And it was. Within a week, the FBI had expanded their investigation into Cascade Development's operations across 4 states. The Vernon sisters pled guilty to federal fraud charges in exchange for testimony against their former employer. Richard Cascade himself was arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to racketeering. The canyon was safe. But victory came with a price. The media attention brought tourists and curiosity seekers to the area. Property values started rising. Development pressures increased, just from different sources. I'd won the battle, but the war for the canyon's future was far from over. Have you ever fought for something bigger than yourself? Something that mattered more than your own comfort or security? 6 months later, I stood on my deck watching the sunrise paint the canyon walls gold and red. The federal government had designated the entire area a protected wildlife corridor, thanks partly to the evidence we'd gathered about the fraudulent environmental claims. No casinos, no hotels, no concrete monuments to greed. My father's ranger badge sat on the kitchen table, where I'd placed it that first morning, when the Vernon sisters had tried to steal my land. But now it meant something different. It meant that sometimes, when you're fighting for what's right, the whole community fights with you. The canyon was quiet again, peaceful, protected. And that was worth more than all of Richard Cascade's money combined. If you're still with me after this whole crazy story, maybe hit that like button. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believed in, drop a comment and let me know how it turned out. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody sees coming. The land endures. That's what my father used to say. People come and go, money changes hands, but the land endures. And sometimes, if you're lucky and stubborn enough, you get to be part of making sure it does.